My name's Lucas, and if you'd told me 5 years ago that I'd one day be standing in a banquet hall, watching my parents hand my sister the deed to my own condo as a family gift, I would have laughed it off as a bad joke. But that night, her engagement party wasn't a joke. It was the moment everything I'd quietly swallowed for years finally turned into something colder, something sharper. Growing up, my sister Emily was the golden one. Straight A student, the one who made our parents proud, the one who deserved everything nice. I wasn't the failure, not really. I just didn't fit their image. I liked fixing things, working with my hands, flipping small places, doing renovations on the weekends while working a regular job during the week. To them, that wasn't real success. Emily became a lawyer. I became the one still figuring it out. When I finally bought my condo, a small two-bedroom downtown that needed a ton of work, it was the first thing in my life that felt truly mine. I saved for years, lived on noodles and black coffee, pulled double shifts, learned to patch drywall and tile my own floors just to save money. My parents never visited once during the renovations. When I showed them photos of the finished place, Mom had said, "Oh, that's cute, Lucas. At least you're independent." That word, cute, stuck with me. Then came Emily's engagement. My parents were thrilled. A lawyer and a surgeon, Mom kept saying proudly, like the two of them were royal blood. I was happy for her at first, until I realized how quickly everything became about image. They planned an extravagant engagement party, invited over 100 people, rented out a ballroom that probably cost more than I made in 3 months. 2 weeks before the event, Mom called me while I was finishing a job site. "Lucas, we were hoping you could help out with the catering deposit," she said, casually, like she was asking for a glass of water. "Help out?" I asked, wiping dust off my hands. "Yes, dear. You know your sister's been under a lot of stress, and since you're in a stable place now, we thought." I cut her off. "Mom, I just finished paying property taxes. I'm not paying for a party." There was a pause. Then her sigh, the disappointed, theatrical one. "You always think of yourself, Lucas. Family helps family. Don't you want your sister's day to be perfect?" I didn't reply. I just said, "Sorry, I can't," and hung up. I didn't think much of it after that, until the day of the engagement party. I showed up wearing a simple navy suit. I wasn't flashy, but I looked fine. My parents were dressed like they were hosting a royal gala. Emily, of course, looked like she was walking the red carpet. White gown, diamond earrings, the whole show. The first hour was fine. Drinks, small talk, fake smiles. People congratulated her, and she introduced me as my brother Lucas, the handyman. I forced a polite laugh. That word again, handyman. It sounded small, like a downgrade from brother. Then came the presentation. My dad took the microphone, tapping it with that proud grin I hadn't seen since Emily got into law school. "We have one more surprise for our beautiful daughter and her fiancé," he said. The crowd turned toward him, expectant. "From our family to theirs, a gift to start their new life together." He lifted a frame wrapped in gold paper and turned it around. Applause. Laughter. Emily gasped. I froze. It was my condo's deed. I recognized it instantly. The address, the title, my signature on the bottom right corner. My name, still there, but with a line drawn through it in red ink. A sticky note across the glass said, "Congratulations, Emily and Daniel, your first home." For a moment, I didn't breathe. The crowd was clapping. Mom was crying. Emily was hugging Dad, squealing, "Oh my God, you didn't." I stepped closer, my hands shaking just slightly. "Dad," I said quietly, "what is this?" He smiled, still holding the mic, "A little family gift. We know you bought the condo, but it's all in the family, right? You'll understand someday." Mom added, with that smirk she saved for me, "You can always get another place. Your sister's starting a new life." The laughter that followed didn't sound real. My stomach dropped. I could hear my pulse in my ears. Every instinct told me to yell, to grab the frame, to tell everyone exactly what was happening, but I didn't. I just stood there, numb. Emily turned to me, eyes wide and smiling. "Lucas, you don't mind, right? You're the best brother ever." I smiled back, though I could barely feel my face. "Of course," I said. My voice came out calm. "Family first." The rest of the night blurred. I stayed just long enough to avoid suspicion, then quietly slipped out before dessert. My phone buzzed with photos from relatives, captions like, "So proud of your family's generosity," and "What a blessing." I didn't reply to a single one. When I got home, I stood in my condo, the same condo I'd worked on with my bare hands. I ran my palm over the kitchen counter I'd sanded smooth myself, the tiles I'd cut until my fingers bled. They'd turned it into a party prop. I sat on the couch for a long time, replaying every moment, every dismissive comment, every time my mom called me selfish for saying no, every time Emily borrowed something and never gave it back. I thought about how my parents smiled at her success, but looked at mine like an inconvenience. Around midnight, I got up and started walking around the condo with a notebook, writing down everything I'd bought, every receipt I still had saved, appliances, fixtures, even the doorknobs I'd replaced myself. I didn't sleep that night. At sunrise, I made 3 phone calls, one to a moving company, one to an electrician I knew from a job, and one to an old friend who owed me a favor. By dawn, my building's hallway echoed with the sound of furniture being carried out. The movers didn't ask questions. I paid well, in cash. The fridge went first, then the light fixtures, then the doors, one by one, even the shower head and cabinet handles. I watched the place transform from a home back into an empty shell. At 5:12 p.m., my phone buzzed. A message from Emily. "What happened to the place? The lights don't even work." I stared at the screen for a moment before typing back, "Just returning your gift." For a full minute, there was silence. Then a flood of missed calls, from her, from mom, from dad. I didn't answer any. By nightfall, I was exhausted but calm. For the first time in years, calm. But the story didn't end there. Because the next morning, when Emily opened her front door, she found something waiting that made her scream loud enough for the neighbors to come running. The morning after my renovation, as I started calling it, was quiet, too quiet. The kind of calm that sits heavy before a storm. I woke up in my friend Ryan's spare room with my phone lighting up every few seconds. 57 missed calls, 12 voicemails, and a string of texts from numbers I didn't recognize. My parents' group chat was renamed Family Discussion, Urgent. I didn't open it yet. I just sat there with a coffee, watching the steam rise, feeling that weird mix of guilt and relief. For once, I wasn't reacting, I was in control. And for once, they were the ones scrambling to understand. By 8:30 a.m., I finally scrolled through the messages. The first few were predictable. "Mom, Lucas, what did you do?" "Dad, you've embarrassed the entire family. Fix this immediately." "Emily, this isn't funny, Lucas. There are wires hanging out of the walls." Daniel almost got shocked. "Mom again, you've crossed a line. I can't even look your father in the eye right now." Then a picture came through. It was of Emily's fiancé standing in the condo's empty living room, staring at the blank walls. The place looked gutted. All my work, gone, stripped clean. But I didn't feel regret. Not even a little. Still, I had to know what Emily saw that made her scream. So I scrolled further down until I found a photo my cousin sent. A note taped to the inside of the condo door. My handwriting. "Congratulations on your first home. Don't forget to thank the previous owner for the foundation you're standing on." Oh wait, he moved out. I couldn't help but laugh. It wasn't rage anymore. It was something colder, almost clinical. Then came the knock on Ryan's door. It was my mother. He opened it before I could stop him, and there she was, perfectly put together in a cream cardigan and pearls, like she was heading to brunch instead of confronting her son over a family meltdown. "Lucas," she said, her voice trembling, not from sadness, but fury contained in politeness. "We need to talk." Ryan excused himself quickly, sensing danger, and left the two of us in the living room. "You humiliated us," she began. "Do you have any idea how this looks? Your sister is devastated. Everyone's talking about what you did." "What I did?" I asked calmly. "You mean what you did with my condo?" "It was our condo," she snapped. "Family property." "Family property?" I said. "I bought it. Every tile, every screw, every piece of furniture. You didn't even visit once." She hesitated, her tone turning soft and patronizing. "Lucas, you don't understand. Emily is starting her life. You're single, you don't have children. You'll have plenty of opportunities later. We just wanted to give her a head start." There it was, the logic. The twisted, manipulative reasoning they'd used my whole life to justify why she got more, why I got less, why my hard work was somehow a community donation. I stared at her and asked quietly, "And when exactly were you planning to tell me you gave away my home?" She sighed dramatically, clutching her pearls like I was being unreasonable. "We thought you'd see it as a gesture of love. You always take things so personally." I had to laugh. "You gave away my house and you're calling it love?" Her eyes narrowed. "Watch your tone. You're still my son." "Yeah," I said. "Unfortunately." She left shortly after, muttering something about talking to Dad. I didn't bother following her. That afternoon, I went back to my condo, not to apologize, but to see what they'd done since my little surprise. The door was open, the hallway echoing with Emily's voice as she yelled into her phone. "You told me it was mine, Dad." "Mine," she screamed, pacing barefoot across the dusty floor. "Do you know what he did? He took the oven." "The oven? Who even does that?" When she saw me standing in the doorway, her eyes went wide. "You have some nerve showing up here." "Just wanted to make sure the new owner's settling in," I said, leaning against the frame. "You're sick," she spat. "Mom said you've always been jealous. Now I see it. You can't stand that someone else gets what you don't have." I raised an eyebrow. "What I don't have? You mean my own property?" "Oh, please," she said, rolling her eyes. "You're just trying to make a scene because you hate that I'm finally happy." I couldn't believe it. She really believed that narrative. It wasn't even about the condo anymore. It was about ego, about control, about her need to keep being the favorite, no matter who got crushed in the process. As I walked past her, I noticed something. She and Daniel had already started bringing in furniture. New chairs, a cheap couch, a rug rolled halfway out. Like they were pretending everything was fine. Like they could overwrite what I'd built. So I left quietly, but not before noticing one detail. She hadn't changed the locks. That night, Dad called. His voice was low, angry in that controlled way he used when he wanted to sound rational. "Son," he began, "we're all very disappointed in how you handled this." "I'm sure," I said. "I understand you're upset," he continued, "but you've gone too far. Your sister's crying nonstop. Daniel's threatening to sue you." I almost laughed. "Sue me? For taking back my property?" "Lucas, be serious," he said. "This is a family matter. You've made it public. Your aunt called me. She said people online are talking about it already. Do you want to ruin your sister's reputation before her wedding?" And there it was again. Their favorite trick, guilt wrapped in morality. "Be quiet. Don't cause trouble. Think of the family's image." I let him talk for a while, until he said something that made my stomach twist. "You need to apologize, return everything you took, and sign over the deed properly," he said. "It's the least you can do after everything we've done for you. Everything you've done for me." I repeated slowly. "What exactly have you done for me, Dad?" He hesitated. "We raised you, fed you, put a roof over your head. You mean until I turned 18 and you charged me rent to sleep in my own room?" I said. There was silence on the line. Then his tone turned cold. "If you're going to act like this, maybe you shouldn't come to the wedding." "I wasn't planning to," I said and hung up. The next few days were a blur of passive-aggressive texts, relatives calling to mediate, and Facebook posts from Emily with vague captions like, "Some people can't stand to see others happy." Every time I saw one, I felt that same dull ache in my chest. Not anger, just disappointment. But they weren't done. One evening, I came home from work and found an envelope taped to my door. Inside was a letter from their lawyer. Apparently, my parents and Emily had collectively decided that the condo should remain within the family's name for unity and future stability. They accused me of malicious destruction of property and demanded I restore all removed items immediately. It was almost funny. They'd actually gone that far. I spent the next hour just pacing my apartment, reading the letter over and over. They really thought they could bully me into surrendering what was mine. Then my phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. "Hope you're proud. You've broken Mom's heart. She hasn't stopped crying since you left. You should see what you've done." I stared at it for a while, then typed back. She didn't cry when she erased my name off a deed. No reply. But I wasn't done either. That night, I went back through every old email, every receipt, every digital record showing my payments for that condo, from the down payment to the renovation materials. I printed everything, neatly organized in a folder. If they wanted to play legal games, fine. I'd play better. The next morning, I dropped a copy off at my lawyer's office. He skimmed the documents, then looked up at me. They don't have a case. You're the sole owner. If anything, they've committed attempted property fraud. I nodded slowly. Good. I'm not filing yet, but let's keep it ready. He smiled faintly. You planning something? I just said, let's call it returning the favor. A few days later, the engagement party fallout reached full swing. Friends of the family started messaging me quietly, saying they'd heard something happened at the condo. Apparently, Emily and Daniel had to move back into my parents' house temporarily because there was no running water and someone had changed the locks. I hadn't touched the locks. Not yet. But what I did next would make them wish I had. Because when Emily opened her front door the following weekend, expecting to find the place fixed up again, she was met with something else entirely, something that made her scream so loud the neighbors thought there'd been a break-in. And that was just the beginning. It took exactly 5 days after the lawyer letter for the next blow to land, and this one hit differently. The condo situation had turned into a cold war between me and my family, but what came next wasn't just disrespect. It was betrayal, the kind that takes years of built-up trust and grinds it into dust with a smile. It started on a Tuesday afternoon. I was at work, doing an electrical inspection for a client, when my phone buzzed nonstop in my pocket. Normally, I ignore calls on site, but this time, the notifications were from my bank app. Transaction alerts. Large ones. At first, I thought it was fraud. Then I looked closer. Transfers. Out of my personal savings account. 3 separate withdrawals totaling nearly $27,000. My stomach dropped. I froze right there, standing by the circuit box, the hum of the wires fading out as my heartbeat got louder. I opened the banking history, scrolled fast, and saw the names. Emily. Mom. Dad. I couldn't process it. My parents weren't even listed on that account. They shouldn't have access. Unless someone had helped them. I called the bank immediately, my voice barely steady. The woman on the other end, kind, calm, robotic, told me the transactions had been approved in person 2 days ago at a local branch. She said the staff confirmed the identity using matching documents. Documents? I asked. Yes, she said. Driver's license and proof of relationship. It was your father. My chest tightened. My father's name isn't on that account. There was a pause. According to our records, it was added recently, through a signed consent form filed last week. I felt my throat close up. A consent form I never signed. She hesitated again, then said quietly, Mr. Reyes, I recommend coming in immediately. I'll flag your account. I didn't even finish the job. I drove straight there, adrenaline burning through my veins. When I got to the branch, the manager, middle-aged, polite, visibly uncomfortable, sat me down and handed me a folder. Inside was a printed account modification form. My name was there, my supposed signature at the bottom, and in neat cursive beside it. Authorized access granted to Martin and Rebecca Reyes, parents. It looked like my handwriting, but it wasn't. My dad had forged my signature. The manager lowered his voice. We're investigating internally, but since it involved family and the documents appeared legitimate, the teller processed it. I'm very sorry. Sorry. That word kept echoing. Sorry didn't cover it. Sorry didn't return the money. Sorry didn't fix what it felt like to realize your own parents broke into your finances like burglars in daylight. That night, I called my dad. He didn't even deny it. It's family money, he said flatly. You were being selfish with it. We just redirected it where it belonged. Redirected? I repeated. My voice cracked. You stole from me. Don't use that word, he snapped. We used it for Emily's venue deposit. You'll get it back once the wedding's done. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You took $27,000 for a wedding? He didn't even flinch. It's your sister's future, Lucas. You should be proud to contribute. I wanted to scream, to throw something. Instead, I just stood there, the phone pressed to my ear, listening to him rationalize theft as love. You forged my signature, I said finally. Don't exaggerate. Your mother filled it out. I just signed your name because you weren't answering our calls. You left us no choice. No choice. That phrase hit harder than the theft itself. As if my boundaries were optional. As if my silence was permission. When I hung up, my hands were shaking so badly, I dropped my phone. I just sat there, staring at it, replaying every childhood memory where my dad called me overdramatic. Every time Mom said, "You'll understand when you're older." Turns out I did understand. just not the way they hoped. The next morning, I went to the police. I wasn't even sure I could press charges yet. It was complicated because of the family connection, but I filed a report anyway. The officer looked sympathetic. Family or not, it's forgery and theft, he said. If you can prove it, they're in serious trouble. I left with trembling hands clutching the report copy. A few hours later, Mom called me. Her voice was soft, trembling just enough to sound innocent. Lucas, what are you doing? You called the police. Yes, I said. Are you trying to destroy this family? She asked. Dad forged my signature. You're blowing this out of proportion. You know he didn't mean harm. We needed help, and you've always had money lying around. You could have told us no, but you didn't answer your phone. I didn't answer because you were trying to manipulate me again, I said. She went silent for a moment, then switched tactics. If you go through with this, we could lose everything. Do you really want your father in court? Your sister's wedding ruined? Is that what you want? It was brilliant, in a sick way. They weren't sorry, they were scared. Scared of being exposed. I want my money back, I said quietly. And I want you to admit what you did. She hung up. That night, I got a text from Emily. You're unbelievable. Mom's been crying for hours. All because you're obsessed with money. You could have just helped out instead of acting like a victim. It's pathetic. I didn't reply, but I saved every message, every voicemail, every email. A day later, the betrayal deepened. I got home from work to find my mailbox stuffed with letters, not just from the bank, but from my credit card company, my insurance provider, and my property manager. All of them saying the same thing. Account changes have been processed per your recent request. Someone had been calling in, pretending to be me, updating contact info, redirecting statements to my parents' address. They were trying to take control of everything, financially, legally, psychologically. That night, I sat in the dark with my laptop open, looking through all my digital accounts, locking everything down, changing passwords, freezing credit lines. I felt like a stranger was living my life through the cracks I hadn't sealed. But the final straw came that weekend. I got an invitation in the mail, Emily's wedding rehearsal dinner. My name was listed on the back of the card under "Special thanks to family sponsors." Sponsors, as if I had willingly funded it. As if I'd written a check with love instead of having my signature stolen. That was the breaking point. I showed up at my parents' house the next evening. They looked startled when I walked in unannounced. Emily and her fiancé were there, laughing in the kitchen with wine glasses in hand. Mom froze first. Lucas, she said, her tone cautious. Sit down, I said. My voice was calm, low, and steady, too steady. Even I could hear it. They sat. I placed a stack of papers on the table. The forged consent form, the bank transaction printouts, the police report, and photos of the sponsorship card. You forged my signature, I said to Dad. You stole my money. You tampered with my accounts. You've crossed into fraud. I don't care if you're family. You're going to make this right. Dad's face turned red. You're threatening your own father? I'm holding you accountable. Emily stood up, rolling her eyes. Oh, please. You're embarrassing yourself. It's money, Lucas. Get over it. I turned to her. You really think this is about money? She scoffed. It always is with you. No, I said slowly. It's about respect. It's about boundaries. It's about you taking everything I build and calling it yours because you think I won't fight back. Mom tried to intervene, but I held up a hand. No, you don't get to talk right now. For the first time in my life, she went silent. I picked up the papers again. You have 72 hours to return every cent. If you don't, this becomes a criminal case. And if you think I'm bluffing, ask the officer who already has your file. The room fell dead quiet. Dad clenched his jaw, eyes burning with something between anger and disbelief. You'd really do that to your own blood? I didn't do this to family, I said. You did. I left without another word. That night, I sat in my car for a long time before starting the engine. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, not from fear, but from the ache of realization. The people who raised me, who were supposed to protect me, had been using me like a resource. Not family, leverage. That was the night something inside me finally snapped. The guilt was gone. The hesitation vanished. They wanted to play dirty? Fine. Because the next morning, I started planning something that would make their little gift stunt look like child's play. It wasn't revenge, not yet. It was justice, dressed in patience. And when it landed, none of them would see it coming. For the next few weeks, everything in my life slowed down, not because I wanted it to, but because I couldn't bring myself to keep pretending things were normal. It was like walking through fog. I went to work, I came home, but everything in between felt muted. My body went through the motions, but my mind kept replaying that moment at my parents' table, the silence, the disbelief, the way my father said, "You'd really do that to your own blood?" I didn't feel triumphant after that confrontation. I felt empty, like I'd just burned down something that could never be rebuilt. Every morning, I'd wake up expecting an apology, a phone call, a text that said, "We messed up." But instead, I got more of the same: silence from dad, cold messages from mom, and snide remarks from Emily posted online. She turned the entire story around, painting me as the greedy one. Her caption under a photo of her and Daniel drinking champagne read, "Some people can't stand seeing others happy. Family should lift you up, not drag you down." Hundreds of likes. Cousins commenting heart emojis. Friends writing, "Ignore the drama. You deserve everything." I wasn't even angry at that point. Just tired. Then came the real fallout. My parents started spreading their version of events. Word got around the extended family fast. Lucas is suing his parents over a misunderstanding. Lucas refused to help pay for his sister's wedding. Lucas always had a chip on his shoulder. Calls started pouring in from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Some were polite but guilt-tripping. "Family isn't perfect, but they're still your parents, honey." Others were downright cruel. "You're disgusting. They gave you everything, and you repay them like this." The worst part? No one asked for my side. They just assumed the golden daughter and the respectable parents couldn't possibly be wrong. I stopped answering my phone altogether. Bills piled up because my frozen accounts took weeks to fix. The $27,000 loss crippled my savings, and while my lawyer helped me start the recovery process, it wasn't instant. The condo, the place I'd once been proud of, felt like a battlefield now. Every time I drove past it, I'd see new curtains in the windows or a delivery truck outside, and it made me sick. That place was my first real achievement, and they'd twisted it into a symbol of humiliation. I spent nights sitting in my car, parked a few blocks away, just staring at it. It sounds pathetic, I know, but there was something about seeing strangers live in a space I'd built that made my chest ache. Like watching someone else wear your skin. Ryan, my friend, kept telling me to move on. "Bro, it's not worth it," he said one night over beers. "You're torturing yourself. Let it go." "I can't," I said quietly. "You don't get it. It's not about the money. It's about what it means." He leaned back in his chair. "Then what does it mean?" I looked down at my hands, calloused from years of work. "It means they finally proved me right." He didn't ask what I meant. He just nodded, and we sat there in silence. A few days later, I got an email from my employer. Due to budget restructuring, my contract wouldn't be renewed after the next 2 months. Perfect timing. I'd been the guy who worked weekends, stayed late, trained new hires. But when layoffs hit, loyalty didn't matter. I walked home that day in the rain, my work boots soaked, feeling smaller with every step. When I got back to my apartment, there was a note under the door, no envelope, no signature. Just handwriting I recognized immediately. "Lucas, please stop this madness. We can fix it. Come over for dinner this Sunday. Love, Mom." It should have been a peace offering, but the word "fix" didn't mean reconciliation, it meant surrender. It meant drop the charges, pretend none of this happened, go back to being the quiet one who never fights back. I tore the note in half. That weekend, I skipped the dinner. Instead, I drove out to a lake about an hour away, one I used to visit when I was younger. It was freezing cold, wind cutting through my jacket, but the silence there felt cleaner than anything I'd felt in months. I sat on the hood of my car, staring at the water, wondering how everything got this far. I thought about my childhood, the subtle favoritism that never looked obvious on paper. How Emily got her first car at 17 while I was told to work for mine. How my parents praised her every achievement like a golden ticket while treating my wins like footnotes. How every disagreement somehow ended with me apologizing. Maybe this was always coming. Maybe the condo was just the final straw in a long chain of quiet betrayals. That night, I wrote something down in my journal, a line that would later become the blueprint for everything that followed. If they only value what they can take from me, then I'll make sure there's nothing left to take. The next few weeks were brutal. I lost my appetite. I barely slept. Every time I saw a family photo online, it felt like someone was pressing on a bruise. They all looked so happy, smiling at dinners, toasting with champagne, pretending nothing happened. It wasn't until one morning, scrolling through Emily's wedding updates, that I saw something that flipped a switch inside me. A photo of the venue, beautifully decorated, with the caption, "Can't believe it's almost here." None of this would have been possible without my amazing family, especially my brother, who made such a generous contribution. Heart emoji. Generous. I stared at that word for a long time. That's when I decided I was done begging for understanding, done waiting for an apology that would never come. The following days, I started quietly pulling my life into order. I sold some of my tools, downsized my apartment, and started working small renovation gigs under the radar. Cash only, no paper trail. I even took on side projects fixing rentals for real estate agents who didn't care about resumes, just results. Every night, I'd come home exhausted, covered in paint or dust, but it felt peaceful. Honest work. No fake smiles, no manipulation. Just me and what I could build with my hands. Still, there were moments that hit hard, like the day my cousin texted me a group photo from Emily's bridal shower. Everyone was there. Mom, dad, aunts, cousins. My chair at the table, empty. It didn't even hurt the same way anymore. It just confirmed what I already knew. I wasn't part of that family, not really. I was a tool they used until it stopped working in their favor. Then one night, I came home to an envelope taped to my apartment door again, but this time, it wasn't from Mom. Inside was a formal notice, cease and desist, signed by my father's lawyer. It claimed my accusations of forgery were defamatory, and that if I didn't withdraw my police report within 10 days, they'd pursue legal action. They were threatening me. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the letter, my hands trembling, not with fear, but with the realization that I'd reached the bottom. There was nothing left for them to take, and yet they still wanted to break me completely. That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat there in the dark, the hum of the fridge filling the silence. At one point, I whispered to myself, "You can't win against people who have no shame." And then another thought followed, soft, quiet, almost dangerous. "Unless you stop playing their game." I grabbed my notebook again and started sketching something new. Not buildings, not repair plans, but an idea. A long game. Something that wouldn't just balance the scales, it would rewrite them. The first step was distance. Emotional distance. I stopped checking their posts, stopped answering extended family. When coworkers asked about my family, I changed the subject. When Mom texted again, long paragraphs about forgiveness and family unity, I didn't reply. For the first time, silence became my ally. The second step was patience. I started saving again, every spare dollar from side work going into an account under a new name. I learned from their tactics. I wasn't going to rush. And the third step, well, that one I kept to myself. Because revenge wasn't about anger anymore. It was about precision. As the months went by, I built something else, something bigger than a condo or a bank account. Something they'd never expect from the son they once called the handyman. But before that plan could unfold, something else happened. Something that nearly broke me again, just before everything changed for good. It started with a phone call from an unknown number, a familiar voice trembling on the other end, and 5 words that pulled me right back into the mess I thought I'd escaped. "Lucas, your father's in trouble." The call came on a cold Thursday morning while I was sanding down cabinets in a half-renovated apartment. My hands were dusty, music low, and for once, my head was clear. When my phone buzzed, I almost ignored it. Unknown number, no voicemail. But something told me to pick up. "Lucas," a woman's voice said, trembling. It took me a second to recognize her. My aunt, Dad's older sister, the one who rarely got involved in family drama. I didn't know who else to call. "Your father's in trouble." My stomach tightened. What kind of trouble? There was a pause, then a sigh. "Financial. He made some poor investments. The police were here earlier." "It's bad, Lucas." I wiped my hands on my jeans and leaned against the counter. "Police." She hesitated. "He borrowed money from people he shouldn't have. Businessmen. Private lenders. He can't pay them back. They're talking about fraud charges. Your mother's a wreck." I didn't say anything at first. I should have felt something, panic, anger, maybe pity. But all I felt was a dull ache, like hearing that a storm hit a house you used to live in but haven't called home in years. "He told everyone you might help," my aunt added. that you'd bail him out. Of course he did. I exhaled slowly. Tell him I said good luck. And I hung up. For the first time in months, I didn't feel powerless. I felt free. The same man who forged my signature, who stole my savings and humiliated me in front of everyone, was finally facing consequences that didn't involve me being the scapegoat. But that phone call also changed something inside me. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, it was clarity. I realized how fragile everything they'd built really was. Their perfect image, their reputation, their money, it was all scaffolding on a cracked foundation. And for years, I'd been the one holding it up without realizing it. Now, without me, it was collapsing, and I wasn't going to catch it this time. That same week, something strange happened. Opportunities started appearing in my life, almost like karma had finally checked her calendar. A client I'd worked for months earlier, an older woman who owned several rental properties, called out of the blue. "Lucas, you still doing renovation work?" she asked. "Always," I said. She laughed. "Good. I just fired my last contractor." "Lazy idiot. You interested in taking over 6 of my units?" "Full remodels. 6 units." That was a massive job. More money than I'd made all year. I took it. Worked 16-hour days. Ate lunch in the truck. Slept 4 hours a night. But every nail I hammered, every wall I painted, felt like building a life that no one could take from me again. By the end of that first month, my savings had doubled, then tripled. I upgraded my old beater truck to a used Ford F-150. Not new, but reliable. I rented a small storage space for my tools, registered a business name, Reyes Restoration and Design, and printed business cards. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. The work spread fast. Word of mouth in construction is like wildfire. Do one job right, and 5 more find you. Within 6 months, I had more requests than I could handle. I started hiring a small crew, 3 guys I trusted, all from similar backgrounds. Hardworking, quiet, loyal. For the first time in my life, I was a boss. Meanwhile, the silence from my family grew louder. No calls, no texts, no guilt tripping. Just the occasional rumor floating through relatives that Dad had sold his car, that they'd taken out another mortgage, that Emily's wedding had been scaled down. Scaled down. That phrase made me smile. I found out later what scaled down meant. The venue had dropped them after a bounce payment, and Emily had to settle for a smaller hall. The same hall where I'd helped fix the flooring years ago as a side job. Life has a way of looping around like that. I didn't attend, of course, but I saw the photos online. No grand ballroom, no string quartet, no perfect family photo with me cropped out. Just Emily smiling a little too hard, Daniel's tie slightly crooked, my parents trying to look proud but exhausted. It was the kind of picture you'd scroll past without realizing something deeper was wrong. Around that same time, my lawyer called me with an update. "Good news," he said. "The investigation's done. Your father's forgery case? The evidence was overwhelming. The bank's cooperating. They've refunded your losses." "Refunded?" I asked, stunned. "Full amount, plus restitution. You'll get it within 10 business days." When I hung up, I sat there in my truck for a long time, just breathing. It wasn't even about the money, it was what it symbolized. For once, the system had actually worked in my favor. A few days later, the deposit hit. $27,000, plus another 4 in penalties. I withdrew $100 in cash, went to the same coffee shop where I used to sit broke and defeated, and treated myself to the most expensive cup on the menu. That night, I drove past the condo. It was dark, empty. A for sale sign hung crooked by the entrance. I pulled over, just staring. There was something poetic about it. The same place that once symbolized everything they took from me was now worthless to them. Another failed attempt at pretending they owned what wasn't theirs. Through a mutual acquaintance, I learned why. The unit had plumbing issues after Daniel tried renovating on his own. Water damage, mold, repairs worth thousands. They'd tried selling it quietly, but word spread fast. No one wanted it. I didn't tell anyone what I did next. A month later, the condo had a new owner. Me. Bought it under my company name, at a foreclosure price that was less than half what it was worth. The bank didn't even realize the irony. When I signed the papers, the realtor said, "You're getting a steal." I smiled. "Yeah," I said. "I've heard that before." That moment, sitting in that office, holding the keys again, felt like crossing an invisible line. I wasn't the guy they pitted anymore. I was the man who'd rebuilt himself from the ground up while they were too busy clinging to illusions. The first thing I did after getting the keys, I walked into the condo and stood in the middle of the empty living room. It smelled like mildew and paint thinner, but to me, it was beautiful. I turned on the lights, new bulbs I'd replaced myself years ago, and said quietly, "Welcome back." I didn't fix it right away. No, I let it sit for a while. I wanted the quiet to sink in, to remind me of how far I'd come. Weeks later, when I finally started restoring it, I worked slowly, carefully, methodically. Every nail, every brushstroke was personal. I wasn't just rebuilding a condo. I was reclaiming my story. Around that time, my company exploded in popularity. Clients recommended me to their friends, and soon, I had contracts lined up months in advance. I got licensed, expanded into neighboring cities, and hired a project manager. For the first time in my life, I wasn't scraping by, I was thriving. It was surreal, though. Some nights I'd be eating takeout in my truck, staring at invoices worth more than my old yearly salary, and I'd think about how close I came to giving up. But success didn't fill the silence. The anger still lingered beneath the surface. The kind that doesn't shout, it just waits. Because even though life was better, the scars didn't fade. I still remembered Mom's voice calling me selfish, Dad's signature pretending to be mine, Emily's smug caption about family lifting you up. And now, years later, they were the ones falling. My aunt texted me again one evening. "Your parents are selling the house. Things are difficult. They could lose everything." I didn't reply, but part of me, the part that still remembered being that quiet kid standing in a banquet hall while my parents handed away my deed, knew the story wasn't over yet. Because fate had just placed me in a position I'd never been before. Power. Real, tangible power. Financial, emotional, and moral. And I was finally ready to use it. Not for revenge, at least not at first, but to set the record straight. I had their attention now, even if they didn't know it yet. And when the time came, they were going to understand exactly what family first meant. The work I'd put into rebuilding the condo taught me more than how to lay tile or wire a light switch. It taught me patience, timing, and the quiet satisfaction of making something whole again. But the thing that turned the whole story from a comeback into something sharper was what I learned when I stopped looking at my family like people and started looking at them like a structure, weak points and all. It started with one small observation. People who build their lives on other people rarely pay attention to paperwork. They assume love and favors will cover any missing signatures, and they let laziness hide as tradition. That oversight was my entry point. If they were sloppy with the truth, they were sloppy with contracts, accounts, and, most importantly, public records. So I did what I'd done with every renovation. I inspected everything. I dug into county filings, pulled records on property transfers, mortgages, business registrations. I found that the shell company Dad had used for family repairs had never filed annual reports properly. The so-called family fund account had been held at a small credit union with lax security, and several payments for Emily's wedding had been routed through a contractor who, it turned out, was on the edge of insolvency. Patterns emerged, the same few names, the same shaky paperwork, the same people who stood to profit the most when something moved through the family like money through a sieve. It was almost disgusting how easily it all came together. But disgust turned into leverage. I printed everything, organized it, and fed it to my lawyer in neat, labeled folders. He smiled in that way lawyers smile when a messy web suddenly resolves into a clear path for action. "You've got options now," he said. "More than you know." The first option was public. Expose the fraud. Hand the records to the authorities. Watch the system do its work. There was pleasure in that. Justice wearing a subpoena, but it would be messy and slow, and it would humiliate people I'd once loved. The second option was quieter, surgical. Use the facts to negotiate. Use leverage to reclaim what was taken and then some. Turn their own carelessness into my leverage. I chose the surgical route. What followed felt less like revenge and more like strategic unpeeling. I started by quietly contacting the contractor who'd received the wedding funds. He was irritable, behind on payroll, and terrified of losing his subcontracting licenses. I listened to him vent for a while, then offered him a deal. Sign an affidavit confirming the funds he'd received came from my parents' account and were explicitly earmarked for services that were never delivered. In return, I'd delay pursuing further action and help him land a new client through my network. He took it. Fear makes people make sensible choices fast. Next, I contacted the small credit union. I framed it as due diligence. I had reason to believe funds had been withdrawn under false pretenses and wanted records showing where the money went. The compliance officer obliged. When you present paperwork and a lawyer's letterhead, institutions move swiftly. The trail led to a set of invoices, some forged, some padded, and one meeting where my father had signed off on advance payments that had zero deliverables attached. With each confirmation, I didn't shout it from the rooftops. I didn't post anything online. I consolidated, I prepared. I had restitution coming from the earlier bank settlement. True, but this was different. This was leverage over behavior, and leverage is more valuable than cash when you want to change how people act. Money can be repaid. Reputations and options are harder to rebuild. I also did something else, something my father never anticipated. I quietly reached out to people who still respected me, people my parents assumed I'd burn bridges with. One by one, past clients, neighbors, even an old mentor who ran a small real estate fund. That mentor sent me a single line in a text that meant everything. I remember who shows up and does the work. Within weeks, investors who had been on the fence started calling. They liked that I'd reclaimed the condo, and they liked that I'd built my business from nothing. They weren't interested in family dramas. They were interested in returns. I'd built credibility out of authenticity, and that credibility bought me options, new projects, a line of credit, a space to scale up. Meanwhile, internally, the pressure I'd been applying caused small fractures to appear in their armor. A relative who'd co-signed on one of Dad's bad loans started asking questions about repayment schedules. The contractor I'd pressured began forwarding emails that implicated Mom in approving padded invoices. A neighbor at the condo complex, one who'd once laughed at my handyman title, told me Daniel had tried to cut corners and had made a mess that cost more than the original repairs. It was quiet, it was petty, and it was effective. Then came the key move. I arranged a meeting with Emily, on neutral ground, at a cafe neither of us had been to since childhood. She arrived early, looking composed in that practiced way she always did. I ordered coffee and waited until she sat down. There was a moment when I saw the old sister reflected in her face. Tight smile, anxious brow, and something like pity flickered, but I swallowed it. I don't want drama, I said, slow and measured. I want recognition for what's mine and a clean break from what isn't. She folded her hands, eyes narrowing. You mean you still care about the condo? It's not about a building, I replied. It's about principle, and about the fact that you, Dad, and Mom crossed a line. She laughed, a short, brittle sound. You always dramatize things, Lucas. I slid a single piece of paper to her across the table, a copy of an invoice with her name on it, a receipt from a designer that never showed up, and a note from the contractor apologizing for the extra charges. Her expression changed from dismissal to something else. Concern, maybe the first crack of doubt. I can make this go away quietly, I said. You sign a statement that you never authorized taking my property and that you acknowledge the funds were withdrawn without my consent. You get to keep your wedding, you keep your pride. Or I can take this to the people who will make sure the legal and financial consequences are public. Her face flushed. You wouldn't. I would, I said. But I'd rather not. I don't want to destroy you. I want what I deserve. She stared at the paper, hands trembling now. Pride warred with panic. Pride always does first, until the bill collectors arrive. Fine, she said finally, voice small. I'll talk to Mom and Dad. That night, I sat in my condo with the city lights bleeding through the blinds and felt oddly empty. I'd arranged the pieces, nudged the dominoes into place, and given them a choice. The real test was whether they'd pick pride or peace. If they chose peace, I'd extract what I needed, documents returned, an admission, an agreement to repair the damage done. If they chose pride, the consequences would ripple wider than this family dinner table ever had. A week later, Emily called. Her voice was thin. They won't sign, she said. Dad says he'd rather risk everything than admit he was wrong. I listened. The anger that rose inside me wasn't loud, just a steady pulse. Okay, I said. Then we don't negotiate anymore. That same day, I walked into my lawyer's office with 7 sealed folders and a clear plan. The folders contained copies of bank records, invoices, affidavits from the contractor, a timeline of forged withdrawals, and a batch of emails that showed collusion to conceal payments. I also had a public relations contact on standby, someone who knew how to make a narrative tidy and undeniable without sensationalism. We crafted a measured statement, factual, non-salacious, impossible to spin into sympathy for the accused. "Ready?" my lawyer asked. I nodded. "Do it." He sent letters, formal, precise, to the parties involved: the contractor, the credit union, local authorities. He filed an official complaint about the padded invoices and the misappropriation of funds. He informed the lender who had claims against Dad that I had records showing misuse of those funds. The legal machine began to hum. Within 48 hours, there were inquiries. The contractor agreed to cooperate fully when confronted with the evidence. The credit union placed holds on accounts tied to suspicious transactions. A lender requested an immediate audit. The voices that had once laughed at me as the handyman started to sound nervous when they called my name. It was cleaner than I'd imagined and more brutal than I'd wanted. News traveled in little pockets. Neighbors whispered, distant relatives sent furtive messages, and Emily began to avoid family gatherings entirely. The house where they'd once celebrated achievements suddenly felt like a room with a slowly lowering roof. I'd set out wanting my property and my dignity back. Now I had control. Not a vindictive, gloating control, but a power that allowed me to decide how much to reveal and when to press. I could ruin them, expose them, and watch as their perfect image crumbled. Or I could use the leverage to force restitution, protect the contractor so he didn't go under, and press charges only when necessary. I chose both. I demanded full restitution to restore my accounts, public retraction emails to family members that had smeared me, and a formal statement acknowledging the forgery and fund misuse. In exchange, I offered to withhold the most damaging documents from public release, provided they complied fully and immediately. It was a tightrope: mercy for compliance, consequences for defiance. The night they finally came to sign, the house smelled of stale coffee and fear. Dad's hands shook as he held the pen. Mom's eyes were rimmed red. Emily avoided my gaze entirely. They signed the documents, but the faces they made were a mix of relief and something worse: defeat. When the papers were filed and the restitution checks written, a strange calm settled over me. The law had done its part, my ledger balanced. But the real payback, what I'd quietly set in motion, was watching their world rearrange itself to fit the truth. Friends who'd once fawned were distant. Lenders called with tighter terms. The house went on the market, and for the first time in years, my parents had to face the idea of starting over without the illusion of safety. I stood on the balcony of the condo one night, looking out at the city, and realized something else had shifted. My identity wasn't tied to being the guy they'd labeled handyman anymore. I was Lucas, the man who could build, who could plan, who could take what was broken and turn it into something better. Power had come with price and purpose. But even as restitution cleared and the legal threats faded, a hollow part of me remained. The family fractures weren't healed. They were set like concrete around old bones. And there was one final thing I wanted: not money, not an apology, but a moment that would make them feel the same smallness they'd made me feel for decades. A moment that would close the chapter properly. I planned it like I did everything else: quietly, precisely, with patience. I didn't need spectacle. I needed the truth to be undeniable and to land in the one place that mattered the most to them: their reputation in the small circle that still admired them. The night I put the last piece in motion, I sat alone in the condo with the keys on the table and a single lamp on. I wrote a short note and tucked it into an envelope addressed to the entire family. I didn't sign it. Inside, I placed copies of the documents they'd signed and one photograph, a single image of the framed deed, the one Dad had waved in the banquet hall months ago, now with my name cleanly across it again. I walked to the mailbox and dropped it in. Then I waited. What came next was quieter than I expected and heavier than I imagined. Early the next morning, my phone buzzed nonstop. The first message was from an unknown number. "We found the envelope. We're meeting tonight." I smiled, and for the first time in a long time, I slept. But when I woke up, the world had shifted in a way I hadn't counted on. There was a knock at my door, unexpected, deliberate, and when I opened it, the expression on the person standing there told me that whatever I'd set in motion had reached deeper than I thought. When I opened the door that morning, I expected maybe a courier or a client. Instead, it was my mother. She looked 10 years older, hair unkempt, eyes swollen, the kind of exhaustion that seeps into a person when the walls finally close in. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there gripping an envelope. "Can I come in?" she whispered. I stepped aside. She walked in like she was entering a stranger's home, eyes darting around the condo that used to be theirs. She stared at the framed deed on the table, the one with my name restored, the one I'd sent copies of. Her lips trembled. "I didn't know," she said. "About everything Martin did. About the accounts, the signatures. I thought you were exaggerating." I stayed quiet. Her voice cracked. "They froze our accounts. The lender wants the full balance by next month. Emily's panicking. Daniel's left. Your father, he's not well." I took a breath. "You mean you finally saw what happens when you build your life on lies?" She looked at me then, not angry, not defensive, just hollow. "We thought we were doing what's best for the family. We didn't see how much it was costing you." I could have yelled, could have thrown every insult, every wound back at her. But all I felt was a strange calm. "No, Mom. You didn't want to see." She nodded, tears falling freely now. "You're right." There was silence between us for a long time. The kind of silence that feels like a funeral for something that died years ago but was only now being buried. She finally set the envelope down on the counter. "Your father asked me to give you this. He said he couldn't face you himself." Inside was a check, restitution for the final balance they owed me, and a letter, handwritten in Dad's unmistakable blocky script. "Lucas, I won't ask for forgiveness. I wouldn't forgive me either. I was proud, and that pride ruined us. You were right to fight back. Maybe you were the only one in this family brave enough to do what I never could, stand up to me. Take care of yourself, son. You won't hear from me again. No excuses. No manipulation. Just truth." When I looked up, Mom was already at the door. "I hope someday we can talk," she said softly. "When it doesn't hurt so much." I nodded. "Maybe." After she left, I sat at the counter for a long time staring at the letter. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a victim or a survivor. I felt like someone who'd finally walked through the fire and made it to the other side, burned, but whole. News spread fast through the family. My aunt called a week later to say my parents had sold their house. Emily's law firm let her go after the audit revealed her connection to the forged accounts. She tried reaching out once, but I didn't answer. Some endings don't need conversations. Within a few months, the house that used to host birthdays and holidays went up for auction. My business, on the other hand, doubled in size. We moved into a new office, modern, bright, with a view of the same city skyline I used to stare at through cracked blinds. One afternoon, I was finishing paperwork when Ryan walked in holding a bottle of whiskey. "Heard your folks finally moved out," he said. I nodded. "Yeah, feels strange." He poured 2 glasses. Strange good or strange bad? I thought for a moment. Strange honest. We clinked glasses, and for the first time in a long time, the laughter that followed didn't feel forced. Later that night, I drove past my parents' old neighborhood. The house was dark, a sold sign leaning crooked in the yard. The lawn was overgrown, windows dusty. For years, that house had been their fortress, the symbol of everything I supposedly wasn't. Now it was just another empty property. I parked for a moment, rolled down the window, and let the cool air in. There was no hatred left, just closure. I started the truck, glanced once more at the place where everything began, and whispered, "Family first, right?" Then I smiled, shifted into drive, and left it all behind, this time for good.